Adenauer Stiftung has been playing an important role, and I would say, in connecting Poland to the global agenda. This is not the first event, and this is also done by some other German foundations. The German private and political foundations played an extremely important role in first integrating Poland with the political culture of Europe, and now they are going even further and trying, as I said, to connect this region to the global agenda, which I believe is extremely important for ourselves and also for Europe. And there is also a specific Polish aspect that I would like to stress. I think it does us good to look at, to talk to other regions in order to be able to explain our history and our legacy to people in other regions. Poland, unfortunately, has failed to translate the message of the recent Polish history into a sort of universal language. We felt somehow that the experience of the Polish transformation, the experience of solidarity, of the peaceful transition, was not just a local event, but it was of universal importance. But we failed somehow to formulate that as a message that could be received by people in other regions. And I think it is important, not only for Poland, it's also important for Europe, because this is an important part of the European success story. And now, on our topic, let me first say that my feeling is that often when the Europeans talk about Asia, they think about Europe. Actually, they use Asia as an opportunity to speak about their hopes and their fears. They are impressed by Asia, they are impressed by the dynamism of Asia, especially by the economic dynamism of Asia, and that reminds them of their alleged or real weaknesses. That was not different back in the 80s and 90s when the so-called Japanese challenge was on everybody's mind. In Germany, there was a writer who produced every year a new book on the Japanese challenge. Today, it is more, of course, China, no longer Japan, for reasons that I do not have to explain. And China, there is not such a China obsession in Europe as in the US. But the Europeans look at China with feelings that reach from fascination to sheer fear. The Chinese challenge is, of course, first about economic pressure, economic competition, but it is also about, competing, so to speak, for the European, about the European model versus what people sometimes vaguely describe as an Asian or Chinese model. The success of China in Europe made the Europeans feel that their model may not be able to prevail in this competition, with implications for the European economy, but also for the European security. That makes European business leaders, that makes also European political leaders very concerned. A recent study done in Germany among the German business leaders was published, and it showed that the German business community is extremely concerned about the Asian challenge, especially the Chinese challenge. While looking at Asia, especially at China, but also in India, Europe often feels that it is getting old and it is losing its self-confidence. Unfortunately, the success of the transformation in Central and Eastern Europe does not play a role that one could expect in the European self-confidence, or for the European self-confidence. It is somehow being taken for granted as a sort of pragmatic business that was done and it is now finished. And I believe that the successful transformation in Central and Eastern Europe was not just a European success, it was also a European contribution to shaping the world after the end of the Cold War. Without that, imagine what the world would look like today without the success of the integration in Central and Eastern Europe. This European success story, of course, started already in the 1950s. In Western Europe, that was backed by the United States, and that made the decision to fundamentally reconstruct the European political system. It was about discipline, it was about controlling the national egoisms that destroyed Europe during the Second World War. It was about controlling the competition between the nation states and replacing the traditional model of competing nation states by a model based on integration, on economic and consequently on political integration. It was about creating a win-win situation in Europe. It was also about addressing the problem of big versus small versus medium-sized European countries. A problem that had a specific form, which was the traditional Franco-German competition that produced losers only, as this European system did in general. The system produced losers only and no winners. That was the conclusion that the Europeans drew from the history in the 1950s. This model would have not been possible without, as I said, the strong support of the United States and without the American presence in Europe, without actually NATO. The European nations gave up the traditional national security policy. That was, of course, a revolution in the European history. That was that's helped the Europeans. It made it possible for Europeans to feel secure and also not to fear each other. It created an effective and efficient system of security vis-à-vis the external threats, but also an effective system of security, of a sort of intra-European security. And this system had the strong advantage that it worked. It was successful. That was, of course, much more important than the theory. 1989, the year 1989 was a great success of the system, and it was a challenge to the system. A success because the values of Europe prevailed in the eastern part of the continent too, but it was a challenge also because, the external environment totally changed. The global environment changed. Europe faced the fundamental question: would this system based on integration come to an end with the end of the Cold War, as a sort of exception from the European tradition of a European system as a game between of competition between the nation states, or would this system prevail in Europe, but now as a sort of pan-European system in an enlarged space? There was also a third option, theoretically, and this option was actually preferred by many people in Western Europe. The option was to make the European system, to continue the European integration system in Western Europe, but exclude the eastern part from that. But that was not articulated in the public, but it was actually very much what many people in Western Europe wished. Maybe with one correction, it was namely East Germany, because the German unification could not be stopped for obvious reasons. I think two countries played a key role in making the decision for the future of Europe back in the early 1990s. This was Germany and Poland, representing, so to speak, two key countries in the western part and in the eastern part of the continent. Germany rightly was afraid of a return to the traditional European system of competing nation states, because Germany was too powerful to return to this system of nation states. Chancellor Kohl rightly was afraid that Germany would sooner or later get isolated in Europe, because it would end in a Europe that somehow would come together against Germany in the fear of too strong Germany. Poland was afraid not so much of its own strengths. Poland was afraid of its weakness. Poland was interested in not returning to the traditional system and coming back to the traditional sandwich position between Germany and Russia. So both countries were interested in preventing Europe from a return to the traditional European geopolitics. And the only solution to do that was to enlarge NATO and the European Union. For the reforms in Poland and in Central Europe, that was of fundamental importance. The effort had to be done by the countries themselves, but the integration in NATO and in the European Union gave their efforts a clear sense of direction. And the slogan of return to Europe was of course intellectually a simplification, but this simplification was politically right, it was historically right, and played therefore an important positive role. I also want to remind you that the 1990s, especially the early 1990s, was a period of an enormous confidence in the liberal democracy and in the market economy. It was a time when, well, the capitalism was in a sort of triumphant mood, and people in this country profited from that, but they also contributed to that. Their answer to those who preached a sort of third way was very clear. No, we have no interest whatsoever in a third way. Our choice is liberal democracy and market economy. They were extremely enthusiastic about that. Now let me sum that up. Where are we today? The European integration has been successful. The European integration today is facing new and sometimes even dramatic challenges. First, we have run out of external enemies. We have no consolidating enemies anymore. We have only disintegrating challenges coming from the outside world. Another change in paradigm in Europe is that we have a new self-confidence in the nation states in Europe. This is the result of a long phase of the European integration. The new generation of Europeans no longer understands the language of the generation of the 50s and 60s, part of which was the limited confidence in themselves. Do not trust yourself, because we know what mistakes Europe did in the past. this language is no longer understood by the younger generation. And this is, by the way, why Chancellor Kohl was unable to get across his message of Europe, and that made him lose the last election. His successor, Chancellor Schröder, used a totally different language. As a result of that, we have a sort of shift of power in the system of the European Union, back from the community institutions more to the intergovernmental institution. The question that we are facing now is the internal self-confidence or confidence in Europe so stable that it cannot be undermined by this intergovernmental message? And how does that make Europe fit, or does it make Europe fit for reaching out to the world? Europe today, while looking at the outside world, is getting more inward looking, is getting more introspective. So the dilemma that Europe also is facing today is how to reach out to the world, how to play a role in the world that reflects the European power without getting disintegrated. Central and Eastern Europe shares has become part of Europe, both in the positive and in the negative part. We also, and the recent survey by the German Marshall Fund reflects that very clearly, we also share more and more the dream of Europe that neglects the world. We also have a decline in support for a more ambitious approach toward the world, for military intervention. We also somehow seem to share the dream of Europe as a place that can afford to neglect the world. That, of course, is not the future for Europe. And now, our problem with Asia is that Asia, more than any other part of the world, reminds us of the weaknesses of the European system and forces us to make adjustments. Will we be able to make these adjustments? Well, I do believe in the ability of the European system to correct itself. It showed this ability many times, and I have no reason not to believe that it will prevail again. Thank you very much.